Right, we have the Deputy Chair of the Jubilee Party, Veronica Maina, with us, and of course also Professor George Wajackoyah, who is a political analyst and a lecturer of law at the USAU University. And we'll cross over to Veronica to give us a reaction of this particular, statement from the Chief Justice. Veronica, good morning to you, and thank you for joining us on AM Live this morning. Right, looking at that particular story, so what will be your response this morning?
Good morning to you, Mr. Debarl, and it's a pleasure to be in this studio once again to comment on some of the issues that have arisen in the recent past. And I think one of those would be the comments by the Chief Justice, which to me have come in the season where there is heated political activity in the nation, and the CJ having taken office in a period or a dispensation, a constitutional dispensation of accountability and transparency, and in a season where every institution in the land, including the presidency, is put to public accountability system. So for me, I would say that having received a complaint from one of the big stakeholders in court right now, if you look at the nature of matters, electoral matters that are being presented before the judges, it behoves on the Chief Justice not to summarily dismiss the kind of allegations or accusations that are leveled against a specific judge, but it behoves upon the Chief Justice to be more pragmatic, more objective, to look at the veracity of the matter that is before his hands.
Yes.
Consider the weight of the facts that have been presented before him. Because, the judiciary does not operate independent of the society.
Yes.
The judgments that are delivered will be weighed, and the public will quickly give you a feedback whether this is good or this is bad. For instance, if I was to bring forth the decision that was made by the Court of Appeal a few days ago regarding the printing of the presidential ballot. If you ask me about my opinion on the same, or of the public feel and the perception of the public, it had a calming effect. Because if the Court of Appeal was to give a decision which was opposite of what they did, it would bring in anxiety, it would cause confusion, it would put the IEBC on another pedestal where they would have to perform beyond what they are able to perform within the days that were available for the printing of that ballot. I mean, it would defeat sense for them to start looking for another printer. For instance, I'm using that as a case study. Yes. And you must also understand the background within which judgment and decisions are made in court. There's something called judicial precedents.
Yes.
And you study the judicial precedents and you move from one precedent to the other. And you can look at a trend of a judge to determine the kind of jurisprudence or the kind of philosophy that is driving the judgment. So for me, I would say that if I was in the position of the Chief Justice, I would first look at what is the nature of the claim. And the questions that are raised here are very deep. For instance, one of the questions raised is this: would it be correct if I am a Judge Debarl to sit and adjudicate over a case brought by my mother, for instance, or a case brought by my father? That's question number one. You answer yes or no. And you ask yourself, as a judge, if I sit and adjudicate on a matter where my mother is a litigant, will I uphold the objectivity and the independence that will deliver justice to the other party? Question number one.
Okay.
Question number two, the perception of that judgment. For instance, does the procedure allow the judge to disqualify themselves if they feel that their judgment may not become as objective due to other extraneous considerations? If you answer yes, that the legal allows for judges to recuse themselves from a process or even disqualify, even allows the litigant to come before the court and say, by the way, I am not very comfortable with you, judge, at judging on this matter for the following reason. On such and such a day, we saw you taking tea with somebody who is a litigant in the same file. On another day, I saw you walking down the street with the sister of that litigant. And you are attending parties.
Right.
You are having. So I'm in effect saying there are weighty issues raised by that letter.
Okay.
And what the Chief Justice should do as the Chief Administrator of the Judiciary the one who, who manages the administration of the whole judiciary system in Kenya. I would like to hear him addressing himself to the issues raised. For instance, do we need to do disclosures from the judge's perspective? That are they relatives with the top NASA lawyer? Do they have any relations? Do those relations affect the kind of a judgment that you'll be delivering?
Right.
So for me, I say, I still have not had an answer. I have only had ultimatums, warnings, and the only institution right now that should be issuing ultimatums, if you were to ask me, is the IEBC from Chebukati.
Thank you.
To warn the parties,
yes.
Let me finish this and then you take it up. To warn the parties that the institution is no longer going to condone any language that leads to violence, any language that brings disharmony within the public sector as we walk towards the 8th of August.
All right, let me get also briefly the reaction of Professor George Wajackoyah to just tell us, looking at this, she's mentioning the judicial precedent, and of course now, if you're remotely connected to your relative in any way, all right, and of course you're presiding over, a court case, how also does that affect, the credibility of you as a judge?
Thank you very much, Debarl. Thank you, Madam. I respect you a lot. You're a colleague, and we've met in various functions. I didn't know we'd meet today. But what I'm going to say first and foremost, I have to put a disclaimer. These are my own words, and whoever is affected, do contact me directly. Now, as a lawyer and as a professor of law in professional responsibility in the United States and also here in the UK, there are fundamental issues, fundamental flaws in the whole process. But before I put my thumbprint on that, the Chief Justice is 100% right. If you look at the Constitution, the Chief Justice goes by the Constitution, by the powers imposed on him by the sovereign of this nation through judicial appointment and by the oath he has taken. He cannot entertain flimsy issues from politicians. He can only he can only follow issues through the legal procedure. You petition the court, and the matter goes in court. If there are constitutional issues, benches are constituted to hear the matter, and if there is any issue, there are rules and procedure. The Law Societies Act, the gazettement, the Law Society Gazette has the rules. Now, I'll turn back to the lawyers in litigation. If it was in the US, unlike in this country where lawyers just practice on anything, and that's why we have got a lot of injustice being meted for very flimsy work brought out by lawyers. A lawyer is supposed to be the manager of his case and his client. A lawyer is supposed to do what we call inquisitivity, to inquire into each and everybody that is going to be part of that institution. And as my learned friend here has said, there are issues of recusal or recusal, where a lawyer has reasonable belief that a judge is actually involved in any way, either pecuniary or in any other uncompromising way or morally, he got to raise that issue, and there is the procedure. Asking that judge to recuse himself. He can either do it in person or he can do it by way of epistolary, writing a letter to the court, or even appealing against that decision. By where we have the likes of Duale and Murkomen coming up in broad open to condemn a sitting judge, where you have the commander-in-chief of the armed forces and the president of this country, given the mandate by the sovereign of the nation, coming up and condemning his own subjects in a politically charged environment. That is uncouth, that is unconstitutional, and if it was in the US, the president would be impeached. I'm sorry to say this. Now, where fundamental issues have been raised by the likes of Tuju, coming up openly on TV and speaking it up, and then also writing a letter. Yet we have learned lawyers like this one who can write the judiciary. That is also uncouth. We are commingling politics in the judiciary, and this is not going to stand any litmus test. We have seen what has happened in Pakistan recently, where the Supreme Court of Pakistan got a petition against Nawaz Sharif, the Prime Minister.
Yes.
And they made a ruling, and the Prime Minister right now has actually gone out of the whole environment. Therefore, we have to lay a foundation as leaders in this country. We have to abide by what we hold, the Bible or the Quran, when we are taking an oath to uphold the Constitution, so that we could not commingle public utterances that are going to cause discontent among the people of this nation.
Right, thank you. Right, we'll come to you later, Veronica, Maina, to actually give us a rejoinder of that as well. And of course, also we'll be joined later by Peter Kiama, who is the Executive Director of the Independent Medical Legal Unit. But for now, let's continue with our stories, where the National Council of Churches is calling on whoever forms the next government to hold a referendum and change the governance structures in the country. The NCCK says that even with the 2010 constitution, politics in the country is still dominated with toxicity, anxiety and rhetoric that have hindered national integrity and other aspirations.
The Executive Committee notes that the toxicity, anxiety and rhetoric that has characterized the election strategies in our communities suggests that the current governance structures have not satisfied the aspirations of a majority of Kenyans. This is hindering the realization of our national integrity, political, socio-economic and cultural aspirations.
Kwa sababu katiba tulionao ni nzuri sana, lakini inasababisha matokeo ambayo hayakubaliki, kama huyu kuwa na deputy president na president ambao wana represent communities mbili za peke yake na kuacha communities zingine nje ya utawala. Kwa hivyo tukasema tutaweka bombers draft, na nikiangalia hiyo tutaregesha kiti cha prime minister, tutakuwa na deputies prime minister. Wacha waziri anaozungumza juu ya Omar. Sioni pwani mkikosa minimum, and I say minimum, deputy prime minister.
Ati kile kitu kikubwa wamesema watatendea wa Kenya ni kutumia shilingi bilioni 20 ati wabadilishe katiba ndio watafutie wanaume 4 kazi. Wenzetu, tutakubali kitu kama hiyo?
This should be approached from a nationalistic perspective that is inclusive, drawing together the political and other actors in the society so that the outcome that is achieved is agreeable to all Kenyans. And if a referendum is required, then we don't go to a referendum as a contest, but we go to a referendum as something that Kenyans are committed to.
Now, the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission is assuring the country that the election results will not be tampered with at any point of the transmission chain. Following a successful test run of the results transmission system or systems at the Bomas of Kenya, the electoral body is exuding confidence that the elections management system is efficient in delivery and tamper-proof as well.
Spend a lot more time on, and given the experiences of 2013, we thought we needed to be certain about what we're investing in, especially given the importance of having free, fair, and credible elections. And that's why we are here.
Candidates, agents, and voters in areas and in cases where communication network may not be available will be advised to move to areas where network is assured. In some areas, they may cover people know where the network is.
Results will come directly from the polling station to the tallying center. So all the tallying centers will be viewing the same results as for us here at the National Tallying Center. There will be no human intervention.
The government has warned that it will not allow individuals to spread hate, negative propaganda or cause unnecessary anxiety among the population on August the 8th. The Communication Authority Director General Francis Wangusi now says that they will not only shut down such websites, but hunt down the perpetrators, even in their anonymity, arrest and charge them in court. The media on its part, says that statements to shut them down over results transmissions are unfounded.
I want to reiterate that we are not going to close the internet. You need to know that Kenyans are now having a large chunk of their economy depending on those platforms.
The results from the polling station are final. The results at the constituency are final. And so are the results declared at the National Tallying Center. But the question is, what type of results?
We get very concerned when some statements are made about shutting down the media for transmitting results. I want to believe that statement was made in the heat of the campaigns, and I actually want to say that's a very responsible statement to make. The results that will be transmitted are results as relayed by the IEBC.
We want a single source of information. We are not curtailing anybody from doing their journalistic work and what you have been doing. But what we are concerned about is when you produce a final result for somebody, what is the source?
It would be difficult for anyone to play monkey business, as somebody told me yesterday. It's difficult. And from where I see it, I think the Commission, working together with the media houses, I think we can be able to secure the integrity of the election. Because I don't think it's in the interest of the media to manipulate election outcome.
The main concern, Ezra, was the issue of, I know you spoke about rounding up to the next 50. And in a country where the law now requires that the winner has to meet the threshold of 50 plus 1, the worry is, of course, when extra ballot papers at tallying are rounded off to the next 50.
The National Police Service will act firmly and decisively in accordance to the law.
IEBC's ICT manager Chris Musando was beaten with a blunt object and strangled to death in a horrific criminal act by an unknown assailant. The details of a deadly Friday night assault were revealed in an autopsy conducted on his body, which concluded that Musando died of brain damage caused by strangulation.
We as a family are the investigating arm of the police to expedite their process, and we have heard that the UK and the US government are willing to help with the investigations to get to the bottom of this matter. We urge the police to take up this offer if it will conclude the matter with urgency.
But the government has ruled out the possibility of drafting in foreign detectives to aid investigations.
To call FBI and whatever, who else, and Mossad and whatever, it's very easy. But the government has no intention to use such actions to manage perception.
A lot of information out there is false and self-fabricated. And we meant to injure and pain the family in bad light. We also appeal to our politicians to refrain from making careless statements and instead give whatever information they might have to the police.
All right, that is a statement from the family. And of course, we want to also hear how the civil society is also maybe having a reaction on this particular developing story. And we have with us Peter Kiama, who is the Executive Director of Independent Medical Legal Unit, to talk to us and tell us more on this particular development. Of course, they are people who are stalwarts of pushing for human rights, as enshrined in the Constitution, human rights laws being observed, and of course, they are human rights defenders and activists as well. Peter Kiama, good morning to you, and thank you for joining us on AM Live this morning.
Morning. Thank you for having me.
Right, thank you. First hearing about this particular incident that happened on Saturday, of course, he was missing since Friday, then found in Muguga Forest, Kikuyu. His body was mutilated, he was bitten. Right now we have the pathologist actually telling us, yes, there was brain damage. Your reaction? And how is also the civil society maybe doggedly following this particular story?
Thank you. First of all, I think we need to empathize with the family of the IEBC official. And number two, to say that this was one of those tragic events that happens in our country and seems to be happening more often than we would like to see. So it's the death, or actually the murder, because it's clear now from the post-mortem that this was a murder. It's quite unfortunate coming at a time when we heading towards the date of the general election. Now, what I would like to say initially is that we need to accord the family all the support that they need to find out the truth. And if the family is asking for an independent inquiry, they need to be accorded that, because this is a matter that we cannot joke around with. There's somebody who was very senior within the electoral system, and therefore is a sensitive case beyond any other case that we have seen in the recent past. So our call as civil society is that we need to know the truth, the family need to know the truth, the family need to have a closure, and the closure can only come if they know the truth. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, and as history will bear us down, we have these cases where we have maybe independent bodies coming to investigate. They come up with a report, but we've never heard of anything coming off the report. We've never been given all the gritty details of the report. We know the Scotland Yard, they came, they did a conclusive investigation and came up with a report. But up to today, we know nothing of what happened to Robert Oko as well. Would you mind telling us also as well, do we, or how assured are we, even if we get an independent body who will try and investigate this, that we'll know the full details of the report?
Well, I cannot guarantee that in the circumstances, but I would like to say that as a country, we have no choice than to do a very professional piece of investigation on this one. Mm-hmm. Just like that we've seen before. And of course, we have seen gaps before in investigations. And we are hoping that regardless of who was involved in this particular murder, we would like to see the Director of Criminal Investigations and the ODPP, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, come together and put together a very professional team that will get to the bottom of this matter. And that's the least we can ask for. In the circumstances. Of course, we do know that in the past we have had unresolved murders, and there are many, there are numerous across the country. And therefore, that's why we have been pushing for the establishment of the National Coroner Service that will be independent from any other organ, and that will have the requisite experts, including forensic experts, to be able to unearth the mystery around quite a number of deaths that we've never been able to resolve. Mm-hmm. So, the least we can expect and the least we can ask for from the institutions that are charged with this is to do a very professional investigation. Mm-hmm. Right. and enable the family to know the truth about what happened, mm-hmm. Yeah, regardless of who is involved in it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All
right, thank you. And of course, this is coming in light of, we just know, I think 2 months ago is when now this particular act was assented to by the president. It was a bill, now it's an act, the National Coroner Service Act. And what we are grappling with as a country right now is maybe the capacity to handle, such cases as well. We don't have forensic labs that, they're fully equipped as well. So how will this really pan out? Because yes, we've given this to the government pathologist, but with all these cases and speculations around it, how assured are we that there will not be any compromise, right, in the void of, having a coroner general?
Let me say that we do have, the necessary, expertise in the country. We do have private forensic labs. Mm-hmm. And therefore, that's what I'm saying, that we should be able to accord the family all the necessary support they require. If they require that the samples that have been taken from the body to be taken to an independent pathologist, an independent lab, they exist in this country.
Thank you.
And we do have very highly qualified pathologists who can do this particular piece of work. So if they require a second opinion, I think they should go for it.
Thank you.
And when we should accord them that opportunity to do that.
Thank you. Let's continue with this conversation. I think we had started, and you wanted to have a rejoinder on what Professor was saying before.
Yes.
I hope you've not lost your track of thought.
Yes, I haven't lost that track.
Yes.
Because I think the professor could not be further from the truth when he says that Raphael Tuju cannot do a letter to the judiciary or raise any issue that he feels is going wrong within the judiciary insofar as it relates
so
to
Raphael Tuju was a conduit, actually.
Now,
he was given a letter just to read the letter.
Has done the letter, which I have seen in the media, as you know, a letter which is the one that is causing the storm.
Yes.
Does he have a right to do that letter to the judiciary, or does he not? Number one, you must understand the role of Raphael Tuju. You seem to have misunderstood it, my good professor here. Because Raphael Tuju is the spokesman for Jubilee Party. Mm-hmm. In that role, he can raise any issue that he feels is aggrieving the party.
Yes.
So in writing to IEBC, to the judiciary, to the police, to any other institution, constitutional body within the nation,
yes,
he is expressing the desires and the wishes of Jubilee Party. So he has every right. And I must also quickly bring it to your attention, Professor, that Raphael Tuju, as the Secretary General of Jubilee Party, is also the representative who is normally taken to court in those matters on behalf of the Jubilee Party. So he's a big user in court, courtesy of the office that he holds. So he has every right, just like any other litigant, has every right to approach the CJ's office and say, every time my file goes to a specific court number 4, that file disappears. He has every right, for instance, to raise that issue. So with respect to whether Raphael was right or wrong in doing that letter, he was right. And he was not uncouth in doing that communication. What I would ask is, the decisional independence of the judges, does it operate within a vacuum? For instance, when someone is appointed as a judge, do you become a semi-god, for instance, that you can rule anything you wish? For instance, you can issue a judgment that is not judicious. No, the discretion of the judges must be, it operates within a judicious environment. It must be within the parameters of the guidelines, and the guidelines, the constitutional guidelines, the legal parameters, they must all be observed. Short of that, anybody who feels aggrieved must come out and say no. And if I remind you, Professor, how the judicial reforms were kick-started, it was the public that came out and said, you know what? The judiciary is not playing its role the way it's supposed to be playing. So I think Jubilee Party, as one of the heavy court users in this dispensation, has every right to give their opinions to the judiciary and raise in specific courts where they feel the tendency and the judicial precedents that are being created by a certain court align to a certain position.
So from your estimation, also hearing what the Deputy President is saying, oh, you know what, we don't want the judiciary to be embroiled in this political chicanery that we are seeing right now. I mean, from his standpoint, we expect actually him to giving that supportive role to the judiciary, because this is it seems also there is a misgiving from the executive about the judiciary.
What is of a very serious concern is this. When Kalonzo and Honorable Raila stand and pick a microphone and tell the judiciary, we are going to cause mass demonstrations if you rule in a certain way, almost preempting a judgment that is being delivered, I did not hear anybody raise a voice from the judiciary. Okay? When the politicians from Jubilee side raised concerns, and they expressed them, by the way, in a very respectful way, when they raise those concerns that there is a tendency and a build-up of judicial precedents that are being created by a certain court, that is when the judiciary plus the Chief Justice comes out strong in arms, fighting out and saying, you know what, I'm not going to be accountable. I will draw a parallel between the judiciary and the IEBC. Now, if you look at what the IEBC, I have watched them make huge efforts in trying to array the fears of the public. I am not saying I'm supporting the IEBC, but at this point in time, all I would want to do myself is to encourage the IEBC and the commissioners, and to keep building on the little confidences that they have tried to build with the public. But I have watched them every time we have raised concerns, even from a party point of view, from the opposition point of view. Their work has been to educate the public more, to open the space more, to help us understand the process more. Now, let me finish this, because I'm drawing a parallel between the reaction of IEBC to concerns raised by public and the reaction of the Chief Justice to concerns raised against the judiciary. It would have been very assuring if the same Chief Justice was to rise up and say, the content of this letter raises 3 fundamental issues. One, conflict of interest. Does Justice Odunga, is there any conflict of interest when Justice Odunga sits on matters that are electoral involving certain parties? If you can answer to the public that as a Chief Justice, you are persuaded there are no such conflicts, you answer and tell us clearly in very simple terms, you don't perceive a bias, you don't perceive a conflict. As yet, I am yet to hear a response to the real content of that.
Okay, let's hear from Professor Wajackoyah, because, yeah, we have the Deputy President raising also accusatory fingers to the judiciary right now. You should not be meddling in politics. She says also from her own estimation that, of course, the rulings that we've had from Judge Odunga, they've been very injudicious, because we're talking about of relations that also or maybe he's remotely connected to some, people who are in NASA as well.
And let me just give you one so that you're able to weigh against.
Yes.
For instance, the printing of the presidential ballot.
Yes.
As against there are 6 ballots that were to be printed by Guril. Now, a judgment comes out where 5 are okay with the same company, but the 6th is not correct. Let me tell you, judiciously, if it is not good for the MCA ballot paper, it is not good for anybody. So if that judgment, if the judge was to arrive at a conclusion that this company cannot print the presidential ballot, that judgment must be consistent. You must be able to find, if they cannot print the presidential, whatever would have affected the presidential for the same party will affect the MCA.
Thank you. Thank you. Wajackoyah, your reaction, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mrs. Veronica, my learned friend. We love you very much, and thank you for the way you have put it. You have put it very correctly, and as a member of Jubilee Party, of course, you have to defend what is your own, and there's nothing wrong with defending your baby when someone from... Now, I will start from reverse. You've spoken about the printing of ballot papers. Before I rebut what you said or make comments, you have nicely put it that the judiciary made in an informed choice by secting the contract and by secting the 6 pieces that were parties or had interest in this whole process, and by just cutting off the head of the president and made a decision there. Let me bring it to you clearly that this issue was an issue that could have been raised by the lawyers for IEBC, including Ahmed Nasir. They failed in law, even though they won at the Court of Appeal, by raising an issue and even by failing to petition a stay for the High Court to look into the legality and the constitutionality of that petition. That was an error in law, even though they went ahead and won on the Court of Appeal after the president, the deputy, and the likes of Duale came out to actually throw spin on what the judges were doing in court. That's number one. Number two, going back now to what you said. When Tuju comes up and reads the names and the whims and the incompetencies of the judge and his relationship and mentions names of innocent people, especially children who are named after ABCD without looking into the Children's Act, and as a father, he ought to have given this information, since he was a petitioner or a respondent, to his lawyers, pinpointing at them to ask for a recusal. And those were very good reasons. If he had given them to people like, to the defense counsels and said, look, why would this case go on when you have these issues? Then that would have been a very valid stage for the matter to be resolved then. And I am sure that Justice Odunga ought to have recused himself. On the other point, Justice Odunga also erred in law by not recusing himself because he had an interest. He should have mentioned to the court to seek consent of both parties that, look, gentlemen, let's go in the chambers. I have fundamental issues here that I want to raise with you. I am related to this and this. I am ABCD. Do you have any objection? If they said, well, okay, they would have continued. That he didn't do. And that's something that Justice Maraga, the Chief Justice, should take on very seriously on that letter. I agree with you to some extent. That in itself has got some validity. Now, coming to what we call judicial activism. Judicial activism is something that works with society. We have had a situation in this country during those dark days when judges were twisted to speak a different language from the political realism. But because of the new constitutional dispensation, we have what we call the red light decision and the green light decision. Both are judicial activism in conservatism and liberalism. Now, Justice Odunga is actually a green light judge who works with society and is actually outweighed by the balance of society. Probably he wants also to show the society that he can settle a score, especially if he knows that it's related to a matter in litigation, and he goes ahead without announcing or without actually disclosing. That one he erred in law, and the Chief Justice should take that matter on a very serious note, and I agree with you on that particular point. But when it comes to issues of judges representing relatives, obviously, we have a whole package. We have cases of a judge, a sitting judge now, whose husband went to court to represent him, and I'm not going to mention for purposes of defamation. We also have a senior counsel in this country whose wife had problems. He went out there to represent the wife, and there was no qualms. I rest my case there.
All right, issue like this, because we can hark back, if the Jubilee administration is raising this particular, misgivings with the rulings, we can even hark back to the Supreme Court ruling of 2013, the presidential, of course, petition. But because we know, and it's in the public domain, that even the justices that were there, right, some of them had relationships, or the wife was also maybe aligned to the Jubilee party as well. So in that case, if someone really moved to court, how will that really have panned out, right, the entire case of the presidential results? Peter Kiama.
Yeah, let me say that, we are in a very sensitive situation. And this is arising from total breakdown of trust within society. We know that. We are a society that doesn't trust each other. We actually seem to be transferring, our responsibility to build trust to equipment, to the gadgets we are going to use at the election. Yet, I think the first responsibility is to build trust among ourselves. And therefore, in a situation of, high levels of mistrust, anything that might impede objectivity or might skew perceptions should be taken very, very seriously. And in this case, we've just seen in today's papers a judge who accused herself yesterday in an electoral petition at the High Court. And she declared and said, you see, I am an in-law of the lawyer who is before me. And because of that reason, I recuse myself. That is what you require to see. Judges and everybody else being very proactive in recusing themselves. However, that does not warrant or that does not give, does not sort of justify public lynching of independent offices. I think I do disagree completely with public lynching of institutions, because the independence of each and every institution we have set up under the Constitution is critical, especially in situations of mistrust. But then the individuals who work in those institutions have to take responsibility to ensure that at every step they build trust in themselves and the institutions. I think that would be my first response to this. Now, beyond the JSC defending the judiciary, I do expect to see the JSC sitting down and looking at the issues that have been itemized by the Jubilee party and consider them as per procedure and respond to the party in writing. I think it's not a public contest here. If there are fundamental issues, let them be placed before the JSC in a formal session. Let them deliberate as per procedure and respond to the party. But let's stop this public lynching of institutions. I think it's not helpful, and these public contests are not helpful because they tend to confuse the citizenry. Yeah, because the citizenry, me being one, expect to see that procedures are followed by each and every party in this contest.
Right, but what sort of information are we sending, or signal are we sending out there when we see the executive? They're the people themselves who actually are lynching these particular institutions. Yeah. We've heard very categorically from the Deputy President himself.
Yeah.
Right? Your reaction?
I guess what I would say is this. The executive normally attracts bigger condemnation than any other party for obvious reasons that they are wielding the instruments of power. So there is a tendency normally that the executive will be judged more harshly. The incumbency is treated with a lot of suspicion many times. So you will find that there will be more opposition anytime the executive wants to raise, even genuine, even objective actions. They are treated, they are so treated with suspicion.
We do have, I want you to respond to that particular clip where he's saying,
yes,
yeah, they should not be, or they're meddling
with
the politics of the day.
I keep saying, Debarl, in the season of accountability, the president himself, not any other person, the institution of the presidency has been held to so much account. There is so much call for them to explain themselves in many projects, in many actions that they have taken. And if you look at the constitutional dispensation, it allows for lots of accountability to the public. So I'm looking at it this way. The judiciary should be very pragmatic. When issues are raised, they should quickly walk in and look at the content. Mark that word. The content of the issue that is being raised. Because this is the same judiciary which, by the way, I have a lot of confidence in the judiciary, yes, that this same judiciary will be looking forward to that if there are serious electoral disputes, especially on the presidential vote, yes, they are the same ones who will adjudge. So it is important for us to know the sanctity of that institution is needed for us to keep being sane and keep sanity within this electoral period. But I'm saying that, yes, I am now saying this, they should view it in a very different way because of the season we are at. Look at the contents of the issues being raised. Like he says, strike a balance between accountability and where you now come out to the public showing as though you will deliver any judgment because you have the independence of the judiciary. Strike a balance between the two as the Chief Justice in that office. Explain yourself. Explain the institution.
All right, thank you.
And let me also mention one more point.
But before you do mention, I want you just to give it to me
on
straight.
Good governance.
No. Don't even go to the good governance because you have it.
I have given it to you straight that
No, you haven't. Because you have a clip.
Yes.
Where you've had the Deputy President mentioning this. I want your reaction, just given because he's
my reaction is this. I treat it as a concern being raised to the judiciary. That's why I'm talking about accountability and a response that gives answers to the concerns being raised. They should treat it, judiciary should treat those comments as feedback from a stakeholder, a key stakeholder who is using the judiciary. It's a feedback. It is saying, you know what, there is a trend we have observed, and not on one matter, on several matters, meaning they have been quiet as they observed that. It is reaching a point where, the tipping point, the tipping, that one that breaks the camels, the last straw maybe. Yes. So they are now saying, there are certain issues that we have harbored and we haven't spoken. But now we've done a letter. We are raising these concerns. Can you address them before we go into the vote? So that, for instance, why would the CJ insist on a specific person, for instance? If issues are raised about you, the way you broadcast this program, why would NTV stand and say, we are not even willing to look at it, he will continue doing it even as you lose viewership as NTV? Does it make sense to do that? I would say it is important for objectivity to be applied in the complaints that has been done. And in any event, judiciary is about adjudicating those complaints, isn't it, between people. And one more point, good governance, conflict of interest. Yeah. There is a duty of disclosure. He raised an important point. Yes. There is a duty of disclosure. Could you hold on to that, the governance, the issue of governance? Because I want to get his reactions and then Peter Kiama's, then we'll go to the issue of governance. Let's just get it from Professor. Your reaction on the Deputy President? Yes.
This is an executive office that has been bestowed with powers of responsibility by the nation. And any utterances, whims of immorality, in public, in private, are under scrutiny, strict scrutiny by the parties interested. And those parties include myself, herself, and every Kenyan, including you. Yes. Now, where a head of state and politicians come out in the open market and condemn, not even make a comment, condemn the judiciary, and even condemn a particular judge who actually was dispensing his duties in court, not outside the court. That in itself is an atrocity. And if it was in the United States, trust me right now, there would be something very serious. The president would have been impeached or faced the Congress or both houses, the Senate, and also the Congress to account for his words, because those words are taken as threats, and they were indeed threats to the judiciary. Because and you can also see the timing. They say that before, or they made comments on matters that were before the court. And when the verdict was in their favor, have you heard anything being raised? I'm not here to condemn Jubilee. I will equally condemn NASA, because even Raila Odinga and Mudavadi have also been seen coming up to say on matters which were within the court, saying that if they don't do it in our favor, we are going to the streets to demonstrate, and that in itself was also very serious. But let me come to the point. Denunciation of judges in public, demonizing judiciary in public, and then coming to write them a letter and making it public has two consequences. It means that you're trying to coerce the judges to go your way. What is wrong with waiting for the matter to be ripe in court, and then you raise issues before the court through the proper procedure and proper mechanism for the courts to decide, rather than coming out in a holistic approach? You are talking of electoral cases that will come before that judge. We don't want Odunga. That means you have sacked Odunga because you are the executive arm of the government. These utterances from the president, deputy president, and the likes of Duale, who has done it more than 4 times, and I can account for this. Once he did it in Garissa, where he pointed fingers at Justice Odunga, and I can assure you that lawyers came up in big arms, and they even wanted to cause administration. Well, the president as a person can make his comments. Deputy president as an individual can make his comments. But the likes of Murkomen, who are lawyers, Murkomen, a senator, a lawyer who knows the laws, coming up and opening his mouth in public, that is tantamount to defeating the morals of other lawyers, because a lawyer is supposed to it's not supposed to put the law profession into disrepute, either in public or in private, under Section 60 of the Law Societies Act. And therefore, if you get a lawyer coming up and opening his mouth in a public place, and forgive me for saying this, then he ought to be struck up from the role of advocate because of his utterances. There is a process. Always. Yes. But for Tuju, I would say, okay, Tuju is a civilian, he doesn't understand the law. Duale is a civilian, he doesn't understand what advocates, the rules and moral obligations of the advocates. I can say, okay, there are non-lawyers, they can say what they want. But a lawyer who is an advocate of the High Court coming up in the open and making such foolish utterances is putting the law society into disrepute. Right.
Let's hear from Peter Kiama. Even the Bible says that teachers also will be judged harshly. Because teachers of law. For instance, no. Paraphrasing the Bible. Now here, teachers of law should be judged harshly because they know, they're all the wiser when it comes to matters legality.
No, you see, all of us, regardless of our status in society, I think we have, an obligation to protect the Constitution and to respect the Constitution, regardless of whether we know or not. I think we need to, especially if we hold public office, the first duty is to defend the Constitution of Kenya, and therefore, if I go back to public lynching, what I'm saying is that all of us must desist from public lynching of institutions that we have set up to protect all of us. Number 2, of course, those holding power, I think, have a higher responsibility because they have the capacity to take particular actions. If, let me use the Inspector General, regardless of who that is, in any particular time, issues a threat to a private citizen, it will be more serious than a business person in town issuing a threat, because these people have coercive power, that they have instrument of state that they can apply, and we have seen those instruments applied with very dire consequences. So I do see my president having a higher responsibility to defend actually all the institutions. That is a first duty, to ensure that all the institutions of state are working, the judiciary, parliament, as well as the presidency is functioning for the benefit of all of us. Unfortunately, that's the duty that we have placed on the president. And therefore, there's a higher responsibility at that level. But that does not excuse other people making, utterances that seem to demean institutions. So when you look at it,
yes,
go back to 2008. We had destroyed our institutions to an extent that when the chaos broke out, we were so desperate, looking for any savior within the country, and the level of mistrust that was there, with regard to institutions, really brought us to our knees. We couldn't trust the police. We couldn't trust the Kenya Defense Forces. We couldn't trust, the prosecution. We couldn't trust the judiciary. We found ourselves in a very tricky situation. Mm-hmm. And therefore, for us to avoid getting back to that point, I think the first thing is we have to behave with regard to our institutions. Let's respect them. If they are not performing their duty as required by the law, then we have to hold them to account. Mm-hmm. And we have to keep on raising the threshold every other time. Because the Constitution is a living document. Thank you. And we have to breathe life into the Constitution.
So the posture that we get from the Deputy President, because we want also to really roundly condemn this, if maybe it should be really happening and coming from, people like the executive, giving those broadside declarations and statements from the podium. You say they are right. There is a right mechanism to do that, Veronica, maybe, because once we have these broadside declarations that are given all from the podium, the pulpit of the campaigns, we send a wrong signal to the citizens, especially the posture maybe of the Judge Odunga himself. If he makes a ruling, moving on, and we have this particular perception that has been created, to the public, we will always have misgivings.
Let me comment on this.
Can we hear from Peter Kiama, and then we come to you, Veronica, just briefly, very briefly from you.
Let me say this. Anybody politicizing institutions is a person who does not seem to understand our Constitution. Because it is through politicizing institutions and manipulating institutions that we ended up where we ended up in 2007. And it is through manipulation of institutions that we have ended up with majority of Kenyans not being able to access justice through the institutions we have set up. And therefore, we should desist from also politicizing institutions. I would say this. Our Constitution and the legal architecture has set up avenues for people who are aggrieved to seek recourse. They are both administrative as well as legal. The institutions provide for that. So I do not see the need for us going public, politicians going public, condemning institutions wholesale, because of a particular decision. I do think those politicians have other avenues, both administrative as well as judicial, to pursue those particular matters. For example, if you look at the issue of the letter by the Jubilee Party through the Secretary General, I do still think that the Jubilee Party has a chance in case there's a petition and this particular justice is selected to hear that matter. They have a perfect chance to raise those concerns in that particular case. Thank you. So I do think that the case is not lost for the Secretary General, but also the fact that I still expect, as I said earlier, the JSC to sit and look at that document and respond formally to the party that is, has raised a complaint. Thank you. So I think there are other avenues, and we should avoid, because what happens is, in this current very heated political situation is, if I go out and condemn the National Police Service as one of the parties, what happens is I begin to portray that particular institution in the eyes of the public as supporting one particular side of the political divide. That does not help the population at this particular very sensitive point.
Thank you.
So let us maybe encourage the politicians to use the other avenues.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
They've been set up.
Yeah. Your reaction. Then we close this with drill deep at other issues.
On the issue of whether the president and the deputy respect the institutions of the judiciary and other institutions in this nation. I do not remember any other term of office of any president where institutions were more affirmed than during the tenure of President Uhuru Kenyatta. He has fully affirmed all the institutions within the Constitution. They have been supported. They have been given their budgets. And every now and then, every institution has been vibrant in this nation. And that is why you are seeing the tendency for the institutions to exact and even over-exact themselves, because they have found the space within which to exist. In fact, if you were to ask me, this may have been a one-off remark, giving a feedback on how judgments or how certain things are being perceived within the judiciary. But if it's about the assurance of the presidency affirming the institution, I don't remember any other tenure where a president affirmed institutions in the new constitution, new institutions, all of them almost fully implemented. That's one. And then number two, the approach of the CJ. This letter was done to the CJ. The CJ addressed Jubilee Party from the media. My brother Debarl. What Jubilee was looking for was fair playing field. In fact, the judiciary, one of its cardinal principles and cardinal obligation is to ensure that there is fair play for everybody when they come to the seat of justice. Now, the CJ received the letter. He addressed Jubilee back using the media. So is that approach correct or not correct? Is that the way it should be responded to? That's a question I'm posing. Now, number three, good governance and conflict of interest. My brother here raised the issue of the duty of disclosure. It feels so right when you walk before a judge and they're able to tell you, oh, by the way, even as I adjudicate over this, I know so and so. Do you know you can even grant that judge audience and you'll say, because you have disclosed it, and there is that duty in good governance, in every corporate governance institution, which is being governed the right way. They even have a book where you disclose conflict of interest. Once you disclose that conflict of interest, the board then decides, should you proceed on to sit in that meeting? Are you going to make a decision? Are you going to be one of the people who will vote towards a certain resolution where the conflict of interest may be perceived? So for me, it is so important for the judges now to recuse themselves where they feel that the independence of their decision may be affected by decisions.
Thank you very much. Maybe lastly, because they've been supportive, you say, the regime has been supportive of the institutions. Yeah, but we can pick out also the Auditor General. The presidency or the executive has also shown that it has not been very supportive to this particular office. Cases in point, you know, of course, what happened also during the state of, not really state of
every case must be looked at on its own merit.
On its merit, but we can also raise...
On its own merit, because if you just, you know, the problem we have in Kenya, Debarl, let me tell you one of the biggest...
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we had also the bill, I think was a public audit bill, right, that was meant to really curtail also the powers of the Auditor General as well. First of all, when we look at him really calling out or seeking out for staff, right, this was actually also tucked away in the bill so that this will be also the premise of the Public Service Commission as well. So when we talk about independence, right, why would they also take that particular power for him to actually get his own stuff and put it on the Public Service Commission, right? Very briefly, as we're running up on this.
Debarl, I would say this. The Parliament has a check system within itself. The structure of the Parliament under the Constitution has a check system. So when a bill comes in and it doesn't endorse the constitutional principles that are envisaged under the constitutional order, there is a sense in which that institution is self-checking. It will reject that bill if it is not a right bill. So, but I would say this regarding the Auditor General, every case must be handled on its own merit. Finally, governance is done by political parties, and they have philosophies, they have ideologies, they may be, you know, they may be implementing a certain political ideology, and there is no way you can say that that governance will be done in absence of that ideology. Finally, it will be done. But the important thing is to make sure the constitutional values are upheld at every institution. So I would say this, each case on its own merit. Kenyans are experts in commenting on issues they don't even understand. Have you seen the social media? What happens is this. You will find that story of the Auditor General, some very interesting people, and they're entitled to their views because we have given the freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, freedom of, all manner of freedoms are envisaged in the Bill of Rights. But what do we do as Kenyans? We run into the social media. You only have one sentence of that issue, and you condemn strongly based on perception. So for me, I would say each case must be handled on its own merits. You must look at the reasons behind it, the facts and the circumstances. Was any money supposedly lost or whatever was happening within the Auditor General's office?
Yes.
Based on all those facts, now you come down with a conclusion.
Thank you.
So the most worrying trend right now, and I hope Kenyans, we can change this, the social media,
All right.
it's gone overboard.
All right, we really strapped for time, but I'll be remiss if we don't really talk about also the security of the nation as we're heading towards general election. It's very key. A lot is happening, sending apprehension, anxiety, and people, they're a bit antsy as we're heading towards this general election. Of course, spate of killings that we're seeing, people having speculations all over. But we want to hear, especially from the civil service, and we have very bright legal minds here this morning. And what is really panning out in light of what happened with the Chris Musando as well. Today, of course, the pathologist has come up with evidence that yes, there was a brain damage, right? Because of blunt object hitting him as well. His hands were mutilated. It is outside there. We talked, and we've been talking extensively also on the National Coroner's Service Act right now that has come to full force. But we know we have misgivings. You started on saying that as a country, we don't trust each other. And these are the exact comments that we had Chris Musando saying here last Friday. That because of where we are, even with the electronic system, is because we don't trust each other, right? We don't trust each other as a nation. So how can we be very bullish right now, even when we have this particular act that will see the full force of the law, reaching out to these people who the killer kings in this country. And who are these killer kings that we don't speak about, right? If it has been a murder, why can't we go behind and unmask the killer kings in this country?
Yeah. Now, the issue of security...
Can we begin with you? Yeah. I don't know if I lost the sequence of how we were going. So, I want to give you...
Could begin with...
Yes, let's start with Professor.
Thank you very much. I actually answered the same question or commented the same question yesterday on KTN. I will first of all also say this, and I'm very, very particular on this Musando case. I'm a former police officer.
Yes.
A former OCS, and I was also PA to Kanyotu for many years for information. So I do understand how security systems work, both from the outside world and the inside world, and having been a lawyer for the police in London and also in the US, I have the following. As much as we say what we have said,
yes,
one of the most fundamental issues here is the police in this country. Whereas I support the police, there is a complete disconnect when it comes to homicides. This particular homicide was a very serious homicide, and I'm not saying it in a way of actually particularizing an individual case. Any Kenyan who dies, or any human being who dies, ought to be treated as a person who has died. Scene of crime, number one. The scene of crime must be preserved to an extent that each and every matter relevant to that investigation for forensic examination is actually stored, is collected, stored, and stored to the procedure. There must be parties that have to arrive at the scene of crime to do different duties. In this case, Musando died in a different jurisdiction, Kiambu County description, which has got a different OCS, OCPD, and the county commander from the police command level. Now, if they found his body at night and picked it, why couldn't they take it to Kiambu mortuary, which was within the jurisdiction? Number two, what happened at the scene of crime? Did they preserve that scene of crime until special teams with interested pickup of evidence arrived and did the same? Was there enough light? Why did the police pick up his body quickly and rush it to Nairobi City mortuary? Whereas the other arm of the police was still looking for him and issuing periodic statements that we have not found him. Why did we have that disconnect? And now that we are being told, as usual, that they are calling in the Scotland Yard and the Americans to come in, what are they going to do? Evidence has already been destroyed in this case. Evidence that ought to have been preserved. We only hear that his car was dusted. The usual old school way of doing things in the world of modern science and technology. Why, how, what, when questions that arose from there that can actually be answered satisfactorily by the members of his family and Kenyans at large.
Thank you. Let's get also your reaction, Peter Kiama, because we really start for time, and then we'll come to Veronica as well.
Let me say that public safety and security is critical at this particular time, just like any other, but more important now, as we head to the elections. Number one, we have to ensure that beyond securing the politicians who are campaigning and the current, members of parliament and others, county assembly, we have to do all we can to protect members of the Electoral Commission. Not only by providing, security, putting in place security measures, from the National Police Service, including providing officers, but more so internally. I do expect that at this particular time, especially having seen what has happened, we do need to see standard operating procedures internally within IEBC, requiring staff to behave in a particular manner. Because your behavior, predisposes you to particular security risks. And therefore, we do expect that all of them have a clear SOP from now on, and that will be, that will be monitored by the managers within the IEBC, so that we ensure that none of them is predisposed to any danger, because we are relying on them to deliver this credible and free and fair elections. Number two, go back to 2007, 2008 post-election violence. The working report, the critical report, clearly identified gaps in security arrangement for the elections. And the only, I think, organ of security within the country that was found to have had a plan to secure the country was KDF then. The police were indicted for having no plan to prevent, but also having no clear plan to respond. And therefore, they were caught flat-footed. That report clearly says that. And building from that then, there were recommendations made on how we can reform our National Police Service to ensure they are prepared any other time, especially during the elections. Number one was that the police have to have a clear plan that is context specific, so that the plan, the police in Nairobi have a plan that responds to the security concerns of Nairobi County, and the same for Mandera and any other county within the country. Now, we have seen an attempt by the Inspector General and his team, the county commanders, to put in place plans. Now, what we have done as the Independent Medical Legal Unit is to deploy monitors to monitor police conduct, especially in public order management.
Thank you.
And what we are seeing coming from the monitors on the ground, from 20 counties where they are, we are beginning to see two pictures emerging. One, we have begun to see very proactive measures being put in place in counties by the county commanders and their officers to secure the population.
Thank you.
And that's commendable. But, can I say the but?
Yeah, but then as we're winding up, because we'll have this forum even next week, we'll be talking about what the
that's the one.
So,
yes. But the problem that we have seen from the monitors' reports is that there isn't much attempt to create a partnership between the citizens and the police. There's that huge gap. We saw one incident in Nairobi where 50 police officers were deployed to a NASA political rally to protect the NASA leaders and the followers. But when chaos broke out, the officers could not manage to, even though there were 50, there was a good deployment there. So we're saying for us to be secure, we need that partnership between the citizens and
thank
the
you.
police.
Veronica, also your closing statement as well.
Yes, my closing statement, particularly on this issue of the late Chris Musando, who was strangled violently. Let me just convey my deepest condolences to the wife, the family of the late Chris Musando and the late Carol Mumbo. And it is our hope that the police can conduct thorough investigations and give answers as to the motive behind the killing of Musando and Carol. And I must say that we would request the public to make it easy for the families. The speculation, the social media, the nasty comments, I think we could hold them back and say it's a moment to grieve these two and just allow them to rest peacefully because of the nature of the offense that was committed against the persons of these two without necessarily judging them, because we do not as yet know the facts that are surrounding the strangulation and the death of these two. And I would hope that going forward, even as Kenyans, we can now tone our narration in the public sector. I'm avoiding to repeat what my brothers have said, that we can now tone the narration that we are sending to the public sector, and we should be happy if NTV shuts anybody down or Citizen shuts anybody down who is sending hate speech, who is sending just vitriol and just, you know, that kind of a bullying or attitude that we have held as a nation. Now, regarding the IEBC officials and the commissioners,
right,
regarding their safety,
very
public
briefly,
safety,
because, yes, yeah.
and their security, I think the least we could accord to the late Chris is to make them assured when they come to our counties and to our villages that they may not even need a police officer for them to be guarded and feel secure. Because right now, the institution was threatened by the death of Chris Musado. So let's accord them confidence, let's protect them ourselves, let's protect the institution of the IEBC and allow them to conduct their mandate with a lot of peace on 8th of August 2017.
Thank you.